Hey everyone, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. So the FCC new broadband map, or the new data in the broadband map, came out on Tuesday, and they have come out and said that there are over 8.4 million locations that do not have broadband access. So that's going to be the target that we're shooting for. That's going to be the number basically that the NTIA is working with. So I want to do a quick calculation and see just about how far those dollars might go. Be right back and I'll share that with you. Thanks for joining me. Rick Uzzi here with Zcorum with Broadband Deployment News. So I was looking for this information. So like a lot of other people on Tuesday, I knew the map was going to be updated and was coming out. So I kept looking for some announcement from the FCC. I get an email that's got their various, announcements and documents and whatnot that they send. I think it's maybe once a day. Usually comes out later in the day. So prior to that, I was looking on their headlines on the website to see if there was anything there, and I didn't see anything. And you can see there's still nothing here on this site for May 30th. There's nothing there, and 31st. What I did was I kept looking at the map. So I was looking at the map to see if anything had changed, because on the map it said when the data was last updated as far as the fabric, and it was still showing June of 2022. So I kept looking at the map, and then I decided to go ahead and I kept trying to refresh it, and I was doing a refresh that should have been clearing the cache. I didn't clear the cache, but I was doing that, and that wasn't working. So I finally put it in an incognito tab and brought the map up, and lo and behold, it said December 2022, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's updated. So I went ahead and I did a quick broadcast about the updated map. I compared a couple of locations, and I saw that one of them definitely had changed, where there was a place that was considered not served at that point, and then it was served. Plus, they had added more locations because it was actually a building, not just a single location. So I'd see that it changed. I did a broadcast about that. I was surprised I had never seen anything from the FCC. Then later I saw, the NTIA had mentioned something, and then I saw that the FCC had come out with a note. I'd never seen a note from the FCC, but apparently they do those, because on this page you'll see they've got their headlines. And then we've got notes here. So here's the note from Jessica Rosenworcel right there about this. And then there's also a blog, but apparently since Chairman Pai left, nobody's updating the blog, because the last one was him saying goodbye in December of 2020. So it was in a note, and there's a note here. This is the note where Chairman Rosenworcel talks about the map and give some background on that. I've linked to this. I'm not going to go through this. I've linked to this in the description, along with a couple of other things that I'm looking at here. If you want to read that, you may want to. And then I just want to note here also that I wasn't the only one that was looking for something on the map to change. This is PC Magazine, and this guy did a story about it. I linked to this as well if you want to look at it. And then down here he says, the updated map data did not surface in a copy on Chrome on a Mac Tuesday afternoon, even after clearing cached web files, but it did appear in an incognito window in the same browser, allowing for an easy before and after comparison of a few sample addresses. And then he compared some things here. So he had the same issue. I don't know if he saw my video or he just had the same issue. So, because I noticed after, he mentions Chrome, I noticed after I saw that it was an incognito tab, I said, well, let me bring up Microsoft Edge, because I don't usually use that. I don't think I had brought up the map in that browser, so I threw it in Edge, and sure enough, it showed up as the updated date, fabric data from December. So anyway, that's what I was working off of when I was showing that the other day on Tuesday. So, and this is a Reuters report. So I saw several reports after I did that video. People were coming out and reporting the same thing. So we see here, U.S. agency says 8.3 million homes, businesses lack access to high-speed broadband. So that agency is obviously the FCC. That's mentioned in that document that I linked to below. More than 8.3 million homes and businesses lack access to high-speed broadband internet, and that would be the unserved locations. So anything that's not at least 25 by 3 is considered, does not have access to broadband or high-speed internet. That's what we call unserved as far as the BEAD program goes. The FCC said this Tuesday in unveiling its revised National Broadband Access Map. The FCC said it's increased its estimates of homes and businesses without access by 330,000 locations. The data is crucial for funding decisions, and that is the data that the NTIA will use to determine how much each state gets out of the $42.45 billion that's in the BEAD program. So now they will have the final data what should be the final data that they're going to look at. So they've got all of the unserved, what is considered the unserved locations throughout the United States and territories, and then they know based on that how much is, what's in each state and territory, and then they will determine how much each state and territory gets based on the percentages of their unserved locations versus the total across the United States and the territories. So that's all going to be taking place. And in addition, broadband service providers have uploaded twice now. They went through it for a second time, where they've uploaded the locations where they can provide service. So we know which locations should have service, and we know which locations are able to get service. Now, there's still questions that, there are going to be some locations where it's like there's still a missing dot on the map. Let's say there's a location that maybe still needs to be challenged as far as this location should have service, and it says it doesn't. There might be somewhere it says this is a barn and should not have service. And there are going to be lots of concerns about locations that say there's a particular internet service provider that says they provide service here and they don't, or they say they provide service here at a certain speed and we can't get that speed. Or when we call them, they say it'll take 2 months to come out and do that. They can't do it within a standard install. So there's going to be those kinds of challenges. But it sounds like a lot of that has been reduced now to where it's certainly closer than it was in the first map. It says now, as far as the NTA, Commerce Department's NTIA reiterated Tuesday it plans to announce by June 30th how it intends to allocate broadband infrastructure grants to states and territories. So again, they're going to take this data that's in the FCC map and the broadband fabric. That's all of the locations identified that should have broadband and all of those that supposedly can get broadband today. And the ones that can't would be the unserved locations. It says we'll continue to monitor the FCC's updates to availability data to ensure that we make a well-informed allocation of these vital funds. So that's interesting. So they are saying that they will monitor the FCC's updates to availability data. So the fabric sounds like it's set, but they'll continue to monitor any additional challenges that take place between now and June 30th, where maybe the FCC will continue to update the map with availability data. So even though the fabric is set as far as which locations should be getting broadband, it sounds like there may be changes to whether locations are served or not by a broadband provider. So that being the case, the NTIA is going to be looking at that, but they still plan on June 30th being the cutoff for that when they say, here's how much each state gets. Because they say here, ultimately, we know tens of millions of Americans do not have access to high-speed internet service. They say tens of millions. Now, I just read to you where the FCC says it's a little over 8.3 million. So not sure what that is. That's a totally different number. So I don't know if they're, I don't know what that is. I don't know if they're saying they see more or they're just going based on what was previously put out there, because numbers were, 12 million, 20 million. There were all kinds of numbers being thrown out there in the early going. But the FCC has come out now in this and said a little over 8.3 million. So it says, it's vital we continue to implement this program with urgency. So the way I read that is, hey, June 30th is the date. If we're going to be monitoring that up until that point, and, so if there's, let's say there's a big swath of area, and here's where I could see a major change. Let's say there's an area that says it's covered by fixed wireless licensed spectrum. Well, it may be that it turns out that, this area it's not fully it's not licensed spectrum, or it really doesn't get those speeds. And it could be swaths that like that are challenged or that are currently undergoing a challenge where that changes. In fact, there's a person who regularly watches this stream who commented on the video the other day and said, in my area, I had a fixed wireless provider that said they were providing service and it was showing as served, but with this new map, it's now showing as unserved. So I asked back, I said, was that they reduced the speed down to something under than 25 by 3, or are they just gone? He said, no, they're gone. So I guess they were saying they covered the area and they didn't. So there'll be changes like that. And it sounds like maybe the NTIA will take that into account as much as they can prior to that June 30th date. So that's something to be aware of. And then, of course, after that, this doesn't set in stone where states can send money. So if after this date, this is just going to set in stone how much money each state gets. But at that point, states can determine further, based on their maps, what is really served and unserved. So if they see areas where it's like, this says it's served by this provider, but we know it's not, or we're not confident that they'll be in it, that this will be viable for the long term. And it could be something as simple as, I hate to say it, but something as simple as a fixed wireless 5G service where it could be something that not everybody in that area could get it, because if they did, then there'd be not enough spectrum. So if you go to T-Mobile in places, they can provide 5G service, or they may have a note up there that says, hey, this is limited, get it while you can, because eventually we may not be able to take any more customers. Well, in a situation like that, the state may say, you know what, we want to make sure everybody can get this if they want it. So they have leeway as to whether they'll fund certain areas, even if it's showing up as served on the map, and they can make a case that it should not be considered served, and the NTA has to look at that. But there's that possibility. So anyway, so again, so what they're saying is more than 8.3 million U.S. homes and businesses. So I wanted to do a little calculation here. And this is the kind of way that I do things. And I know there are going to be people that are going to be digging into these numbers. I mean, individuals as well as groups are going to be digging into these numbers. They're going to be looking at a lot of significant detail on all of the unserved locations in this new map, and where they are, and an estimate of how many high-cost locations there are, and all kinds of stuff. And I just don't have time to do that. And so I like to do, kind of little sanity checks on stuff, and that's what I was doing here. So I pulled out my calculator, kind of a back-of-the-hand cocktail napkin kind of calculation here. So if we take... let's see if I can get to my numbers here on my keyboard. So if we take 8.3, let me move this a little bit. So we got 8.3 million U.S. homes, right? So 8.3 million. There we go, 8.3 million homes. And I was trying to decide, what would be the right number as far as how much per location is it going to cost to bring broadband somewhere. So I was thinking about I've been kind of keeping track of prior broadband funding and how much service providers were getting for each location. And it seems to be anywhere from 3,000 to 4,000. A lot of times it's in that range. Sometimes it's a little less, 2,000. Sometimes it's a little bit more. It might be 6,000. And I'm talking about like an average. Obviously there are going to be locations that are going to be way more than that. There are locations that might be $30,000, $40,000, because we're talking about, some place on the top of a mountain and there's not anybody anywhere near them. So if you were going to run fiber to that person, it might cost $40,000 to get it there. So then the question becomes, that's a high cost area, even if it's just one location, or it could be a few houses on a mountain, and it might be multiple houses, but still a very high cost location to get something like fiber there. In that case, the state has leeway to say they have to set a threshold for high cost, and then they can consider what would be considered non-reliable broadband. They could consider satellite, or they could consider fixed wireless that's not licensed, or they could just do fixed wireless licensed access if you could get up there. But again, they don't have to. We want to try to get fiber there, but if it's like it's gonna break the budget to get fiber there, they have some leeway there. So there's those kinds of cases, but those are a small percentage. I mean, if you look at the way it is, it's the hockey stick kind of thing where you've got a kind of a flat line, and then you get to the very last few locations that are hard to serve, and it kind of jets up like that. Those are the ones that kind of break the bank. But average-wise, as you're looking at some of these locations in previous funds like ARPA, then you see, like I say, 3,000, 4,000. If we looked at RDOF, you were seeing numbers like 2,000, 1,000, 500, but those would be people that, number one, could be using technologies like maybe fixed wireless, or they were bidding down how much they would accept because it was a reverse auction. So they might say, yeah, we'll do this area for $1,500, and then whatever it costs, the government's going to give them $1,500, and then they're going to have to build it out. And it might be that they're putting in 70% of that. So it's not just a match; they're actually having to put in the amount of that. So again, looking at these funds, I picked a number of 5,000. I said, why don't I put in 5,000 and see what that gets me? So that was pretty interesting. So if I say now divided by 5,000. And hit equals, and that's not right. What happened there? Let me go back to that. So 8,300,000. Actually, you know what? Let me do 8.4. 8,400,000. Because because it says more than 8.3 million. So let's say it's 8.4 million. It's probably between 8.3 and 8.4 based on their calculation. And again, if I divide that, let me do this again. I'm not sure what happened there. So if I divide that by $5,000, no, not divide that. I'm sorry, that's where I messed up. Hang on here a minute. If I multiply that, can I multiply now times $5,000 per location? And I say equals. There we go. Okay. So if I say it's $5,000 per location and it's 8.3 million locations, then that's $42 billion. So does that look familiar? So the BEAD program has $42.45 billion. So that's pretty interesting that at $5,000 per location, this would cover everybody. But again, there are going to be some locations that are going to be way more than that. And do you want to spend the $30,000 or more to get to that one or two homes that are going to cost that? Or what do you do there? So again, there's the high cost areas to take into account. But the other thing to take into account is a match, because there needs to be a minimum match of 25%. So this 42.45, or in this case, let's just say 42 billion, is going to go a lot further because of that match. Now, how much is that going to be? Again, it's a minimum of 25%. And the high cost, the ultra high cost areas, I believe that they can waive the match. The state can decide that they don't need to do a match if it's going to cost this huge amount of money to get that service there. But again, that's on the slanty part of the hockey stick, and there's probably not very many locations that applies to. So I said, let's say there's a 30% match. So now I say times 1.3. Sorry, I'm having to look around my microphone here to get to this, 0.3 million. And that's going to come out to $54.6 million, let's say. I'm just adding it to the figure because it's so close to the BEAD amount. But so that's the amount of money, let's say, if it was a 30% match, that will actually being put to use to get broadband there. So that comes out to, I think, $6,500 when I did the math. If I then say, well, let's say it's that much money, that actually gives you $6,500 per location to be able to get broadband. And again, a lot of those locations are going to be less than that. They're going to be, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000. There's going to be some that are going to be $6,000. There's going to be some that are going to be less. It depends on how rural they are. It depends on how difficult the geography is. Are you going through up a mountain where it's a lot of granite, or are you able to do micro trenching, and get it done? So it's going to vary. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And, to give you an example of, the kinds of numbers I was looking at from prior broadband funding. So the state of Georgia here has made great use of the ARPA funds. That's the American Rescue Plan Act that was part of the coronavirus package that was passed. And there's two funds in there. There's the SLFRF fund. That's the State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund. And then there's the Capital Projects Fund, or the CPF. The State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund had $350 billion in it. So here you're looking at $45 billion, $54 billion, with a match here. But the ARPA fund, just that fund alone, had $350 billion. Now, it wasn't necessarily supposed to be all broadband, but a lot of states were taking the money and using that for broadband. And then there's the Capital Projects Fund, and a lot of states have taken that. That's $10 billion. A lot of states have taken the money that they can get from that and are using that toward broadband. Well, Georgia is using both. So they used money from the State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund and the Capital Projects Fund. And back in February 2022, they took money from the State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, and their allocation was $408 million that they were getting. So that's quite a bit of money right there, $408 million from that particular fund. And then on top of that, there was a match, and the match was $738 million. So that's like an 80% match that Georgia was getting for that. So that's money that that was going to put broadband in. And it was interesting. I saw something the other day that was showing that Georgia had lost quite a bit of money or quite a bit of locations in this last map. And it's probably due to things like this, where they are taking prior broadband funding and applying it to locations that are unserved. So then suddenly those are committed federal funds, so they're not unserved anymore. Even if the service hasn't been built yet, those are committed funds, so they're not considered unserved, and that money is actually getting to work sooner, which is fine. So I looked at that, and so that was, let's see, the state of Georgia said, I've got the note here, so it'd be 183,615 total locations that money was going to cover, and that was total. They said as far as all of those, 132,050 would be unserved. So I'm assuming what that means is they were targeting unserved, but there were probably locations that were nearby that were maybe underserved, that they were passing through, and it's like, well, we're going to go ahead and provide service here anyway. So they're doing that. So 132,050 unserved. So if you look at those numbers, if you take the 738 million and you divide the number of locations there, then if you look at the total, it comes to $4,019 per location. And this is with the match. That's the $738 million with the match. And then if you looked at the just the unserved, it's $5,588 per location. But it's not really just the unserved. It's going to the underserved or those other locations as well. So again, there you're looking at, as I was kind of thinking, a little bit over 5,000. But again, that's taking into account some of these locations that really weren't unserved. They were served in some fashion, either unserved or, either underserved, or for some reason they were able to provide new infrastructure there. It could be that they just had to go through that area. Maybe there was already some service there and they were just going to be there. And it's like, well, we're just going to provide an option here. So I think that number, 5,000, I just pulled that out of the air, and it turned out to be very close to what the BEAD funding is. So again, that's kind of my way of doing things. I know that people are going to look at this in much more detail than I have the time to do or the capability to do. They've got all the data, and they're going to crunch the numbers, and it's going to be individuals that are going to be doing this, that spend a lot of time doing that. There's going to be organizations that do that, maybe the NTCA, maybe the ACA and others, Fiber Broadband Association, are probably going to all be looking at these numbers and seeing how this impacts what is expected as far as how far these funds will go. But I just thought that was an interesting, again, back of the hand, my kind of sanity check on those numbers. And I've kind of felt all along that we have a really good chance of covering most areas in the country with fiber from all of these funds, not just the BEAD program. I've been saying all along also that the BEAD funding is going to go a lot further because of the prior funding that's been allocated through RDOF, through the USDA Reconnect program, through ARPA. And some of those programs are continuing. There's still capital projects fund money through ARPA that is coming. There's probably no more RDOF money that's going to be committed. I think the FCC has put the brakes on that because that program started prior to BEAD and even prior to ARPA. So I think they're going to wait, and probably any money that they haven't committed through that will either be put back in the budget for something else, or they may take some of that at the end of all of this and say, you know what, we're still missing X number of locations that we need to reach. I don't know. But all of that money I knew was going to make a big difference in how far this BEAD money would go. So I really kind of felt, I still feel confident that we're going to be able to use this money and get fiber to most everybody in the country. Again, I think there are going to be some areas where it's just not possible. Because even if you can run that fiber, even if you can spend the $30,000, $40,000 or more, who knows how much, to run some fiber up a mountain to serve a couple of customers, you still got to maintain that plant. So if you're running fiber and you've got miles and miles and miles and you've only got a handful of customers, you can build it out and you can get those customers signed up. And even if you get 100% take rate, which you probably would, I don't know what you'd have to charge. Maybe you have to charge the same as you charge everybody else. If you get 100% take rate, it's still not very much revenue, and you've got to maintain that length of plant. Now, fiber is very resilient. So if you did do that, there's less maintenance than something like cable or even fixed wireless because, storms and those kinds of things, but and RF problems that you have in a cable plant. But still, it's expensive because you've still got long truck rolls and you've still got the equipment that you're allocating to very few customers and not really getting much return on that. So there's going to be a certain number of customers that just choose to live in remote locations that may have to live with a different kind of service, like hopefully a reliable fixed wireless service, or might even have to be satellite, depending on the terrain and trees and those kinds of things. So we'll see how it all shakes out. I appreciate you joining me. If this was helpful, if you give me a like on the video, I'd appreciate it. If you're not subscribed, click the subscribe button and click the bell if you want to be notified when I'm live. And then you can choose to watch at that time or just later. You'll get a notification that I was on. So I appreciate it. Thanks for joining me for Broadband Deployment News. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.